Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and today I'm going to be doing the Under the Influence of Booktube tag. So this tag was created by Olive from a book Olive. I'll link her original tag video down below, and I believe that she tagged me. So there are several questions on this tag, and I think it's a really interesting tag. I've really enjoyed watching people's responses to this one, as it's all about how sort of Booktube has influenced your reading and your relationship with books and with Booktube, I suppose, as well. Question 1 is, what is a fantastic book that you've read off the recommendation of another Booktuber? And oppositely, what's a book that you've been talked out of reading because of a Booktuber's review? There are definitely a lot of very fantastic books that I've read because of Booktube. I don't think I would have ever picked up A Place for Winter if it hadn't been for Holly Dunn's review. I never would have picked up Mia Alvar's In the Country or Radiance by Catherine M. Valente if it wasn't for Weena Wonders. I had never heard of East Lynne by Ellen Wood until Anne from Beyond the Pages read it. And I think it would have taken me a lot longer to get to reading A Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier if it hadn't been one of Marissa from Blatantly Bookish's favourite books. And while I hope I would have read Maurice by Ian Forster eventually, I definitely think Libby Stevenson's review of it pushed me to read it a lot sooner. And those are just the ones from the top of my head. There are so many fantastic books I have read because of other Booktubers' recommendations. I think there are a lot of books I've been put off reading because of Booktube. Often, in fact, books that other Booktubers have reviewed positively, but I've thought, I don't think that's going to be quite for me. For example, Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney, which a lot of people have been talking about on Booktube and which I really just think would not be for me, and the more I hear people talk about it, the more I think that. However, Normal People, maybe, I might give that one a try, but that's an example of a book that it's not that I've heard like lots of negative reviews of it, but I've heard a lot of reviews which, in discussing the themes in depth, made me think that that's not something I'm interested in. In general, I can judge from a review whether or not I would like the book, regardless of whether the review is positive. For example, another book I have read off the back of watching Booktube videos about it is Days of That End by Sebastian Barry, which I loved, but a lot of the reviews I saw of this were negative, but they talked about the book in a way that made me think, actually, I would like that. I think that happens quite a lot when I watch negative reviews. I think actually maybe that would be for me, or the same when I watch positive reviews and think, no, maybe that one wouldn't be up my street. Question 2 is, has Booktube opened your mind about or changed your mind about any genres? I feel like it probably has. Certainly Booktube has been a big influence in me getting into short stories. I say that I haven't actually read that many short story collections this year, sadly, but certainly in the first year or two I was on Booktube, I read a lot more short story collections than I ever had before, and I properly got into short stories in a way I hadn't before, and that was definitely to do with Booktube. I suppose that's a form rather than a genre, but it's definitely something that Booktube really helped me kind of discover. I think it probably has also made me know my own taste better, in terms of, before I started Booktube, I think I would have probably said I read predominantly classics and literary fiction, but I don't actually read that much literary fiction. I read a lot of historical fiction, both very literary and much more commercial historical fiction. I do enjoy some literary fiction, but I think Booktube has taught me that I'm not as fond of literary fiction as I think I perhaps assumed I was, if you see what I mean. And definitely the more experimental literary fiction goes, the less likely I am to completely get on with it, whereas more like accessible literary fiction and sort of commercial historical fiction is what I really like. I like things that sit like on the border between commercial and literary fiction, and that's something sort of Booktube has definitely taught me, as I get sort of recommendations from people who I think have more literary tastes than me, and that's kind of taught me what I like myself. Question 3, how much time did you spend on YouTube before joining Booktube, and how much time do you spend now? I find this quite hard to tell. It's been 3.5 years since I joined Booktube, so it's been quite a while. Before I joined Booktube, I did watch YouTube videos. I had been watching quite a lot of mainstream videos, and then when I started to get bored of that, I kind of moved into Booktube and started to watch a bit more. I find it very hard to remember sort of how much time I spent watching YouTube, but certainly I was, before joining Booktube, subscribed to about maybe 20 people on YouTube, and I watched all of those 20 people's videos. Now I am subscribed to like 200 people on YouTube, but I definitely don't watch all of those people's videos. I would say I probably listen to about an hour of Booktube a day now. I listen to it while I'm like cooking or like loading and emptying the dishwasher in the evening, and that probably overall takes up an hour, and I probably used to watch like half an hour of YouTube before Booktube. I think the difference is that now when I'm more likely to listen to Booktube than I am to watch it. I also have all the YouTube videos on at 1.25 speed, and I always have a really long watch later playlist of like 50 to 100 videos, and I often, like on a weekend, will like binge a lot of Booktube videos, especially if I'm like cleaning the flat or something. I will like listen to Booktube for like 4 hours in a row, which I certainly never used to do before I joined Booktube. Question 4 is, how many books did you read per month or per year before joining Booktube, and how many do you read now? So this is another question I find very hard to answer, because I started my Booktube channel at the end of my master's degree, and so I had been studying for the past 4 years, and when I was studying, especially when I was doing my undergrad in English literature and history, I read a very different amount and very different pace because I was doing a lot of reading for university, and I did very little retroactively reading that wasn't for university, which meant I was like reading a lot of essays and non-fiction books about what I was studying, and I was also reading novels, but only really the ones that I was studying. And then when I was on my master's course doing creative writing, I read a lot. A lot of that was for my course, and also because I had set myself the challenge of reading 100 books in a year. So I think the best way for me to like consider the difference is that when I sat down at the start of my master's and I was like, I'm going to read 100 books in the next year, that was a really huge challenge to set myself. And now, like, I easily read 100 books a year, and my Goodreads goal of 100 books is like fairly low. I know I will surpass that. Whereas starting my master's, that felt like a lot of books to read in a year. And obviously, like, that is a lot of books to read objectively in 1 year. But now I know that's quite manageable, and now I know that's what I naturally read without like striving to attain it. Whereas that, before I joined Booktube, like that was an enormous amount that I was going to like work really hard to read. Whereas now that's like just what I would read in a normal year. I think I do certainly read more now than I did like 4.5 years ago, but I think my reading a lot more slightly predates joining Booktube as well, but maybe like would coincide with my finding Booktube, so I don't know. Question 5 is, has Booktube affected your book buying habits, and if so, are you pleased or dissatisfied with this? I feel like it's certainly affected my awareness of my book buying habits. On the one hand, I feel like it's definitely made me want more books, and I always have like a longer list of books I want to acquire, but I'm not sure that I actually buy more books than I used to. Because I did used to buy quite a lot of books, and especially when I was at university, I bought a lot of second-hand books, but I did buy quite a lot of books, both for my course and kind of outside of it. And so Booktube has always made me want to buy more books, and I certainly like, I get a lot of review copies now, not tons, but like I get a sizable amount of review copies every year, which obviously I never got before joining Booktube because that would be weird. So that's definitely kind of means I acquire more books, but in terms of like actually buying books, I don't think I buy that more. And I think because Booktube has made me more aware of how many books I acquire, and because I get review copies as well, I might even buy slightly less than I used to before I joined Booktube. Question 6, has a review by a booktuber ever made you retroactively reconsider your opinion of a book? Definitely yes. One of the notable examples I suppose would be Middlemarch by George Eliot, although this is watching people's book reviews of this did not necessarily make me change my opinion of the book, but it made me want to reread the book, which I did last year. So I read this as a teenager and I really didn't like it, at all. And I watched a lot of videos on it from Jennifer from Insert Literary Pun here, I'll link her channel down below, talking about how much she loved it. And I also saw a review by Claire from Clary's Books on this as well, though I think that might have been after I had reread it, but regardless, like, these videos from these booktubers made me kind of reconsider this book and made me respect it more. I also reread it last year. Now I don't love this book still, I like it, but I don't love it, but even though I know it's not my favourite and her writing style isn't for me, I can respect what she's doing and admire it more and see the book as very interesting in a way I don't think I could sort of a few years ago because of watching other booktubers' reviews on it and seeing how other people reacted to it. Question 7, are there any videos you've been inspired to make after seeing another booktuber's video? Have you ever felt inspired by another booktuber's style, like their video style, their book organisation style, their personal style, or anything? Definitely yes. I think like my whole booktube channel I was inspired very much to make by Jen Campbell, whose channel I'll link down below. Like, she's still definitely one of my favourite booktubers, and when I was starting my channel, or like thinking about starting a channel, she was definitely one of the people who like made me really want to start one because I really enjoyed what she was doing. I really enjoyed her channel, and I remember like shortly before I started, she made a video called, I think, Let's Talk About Booktube, and I'd been like umming and ahhing with whether or not to start a booktube channel for like a few months and thinking maybe I could and maybe it wouldn't be for me. And then she made this video where she talked about like a lot of things to do with Booktube and how much she loved it and why it was kind of important and interesting, and that was like the video that made me sit down and be like, okay, I'm actually going to try this, I'm going to film a video and see what I think and then maybe post it. So I suppose that inspired like all of the videos and my channel to a certain extent. And then in terms of like being inspired by other booktubers, I'm just like constantly inspired by all other booktubers. I try and make videos that are the kind of videos that I like to watch, and therefore are kind of constantly modelled on sort of all the booktubers that I watch and that I enjoy. Question 8 is, what are some pressures you feel on your reading life because of your channel? I wouldn't necessarily say I feel the pressure to read more, always, but I do at certain times. Certainly like in Victober, I did feel quite a lot of pressure to like read as many Victorian literature books as possible, which is obviously like pressure of my own making. It was my readathon, but because I was doing the readathon and hosting it, I felt like, well, I want to read as many books as possible because people will want to hear about them and because people will be like wanting to hear about Victorian literature, especially in Victober, for Victober. So it's more important that I read this book this month than that I read it next month. And I definitely think there is a kind of pressure to like structure your reading in a particular way for Booktube. The main pressure I notice, which I know a lot of booktubers have mentioned as well, is the pressure to finish a book at the end of the month. And so like I will never start reading a long book on like the 29th of a month because I want to read a short book that I can finish by the end of the month because I like to round something up. And if I'm like halfway through a book a few days before the end of the month, I like try and read it all fast as possible so that I can finish it by the end of the month, because monthly wrap-ups have become like a way to define my reading. And so I have to like finish books by the end of the month and then start like a new book on the first of every month. And that's definitely something that I have like got into the habit of through Booktube. I feel also I probably read more shorter books rather than less longer books because of wanting to have sort of more to talk about on my channel. I feel that's something I'm trying to like actively do less of now, especially because, you know, I read a lot of books. Like actually I often talk about sort of 12 books in a wrap up. That's really plenty enough to talk about. If I were to read slightly longer books and read 7 or 8, that's still an awful lot to talk about in a video. There are pressures in terms of reading that I feel connected to Booktube, but in general they're pressures that I know are of my own making. Question 9. In what way, if any, do you feel the social element of the community has impacted your reading? Do you think about books differently since joining? I definitely do. In many ways Booktube really helps me like gather my thoughts together on a book and know what I think about it and whether or not I liked it and in which ways I liked it, because, you know, I'm always thinking like, how am I going to talk about this in my wrap up at the end of the month? So that makes me think about books in a slightly different way, not necessarily like an analytical way. It just makes me like get my thoughts clear on the book, which I really like. That's something about Booktube I really enjoy, and often I think Booktube helps me remember books better than I used to before Booktube. In terms of like the social element as well, I love buddy reading, and buddy reading definitely makes me think about books in a different way. I suppose it's just like a more intensified version of I'm going to be talking about it in a wrap up. It's I'm going to have a discussion with someone about it, so I'm going to think about things as I'm reading, and their thoughts on the book are going to impact mine and my thoughts will impact theirs. There's so many books that I've read since joining Booktube that I've discussed at length with other people on Booktube, which has kind of really like enriched and changed my opinion on them. Like for example, just thinking of a book like Jane Austen, The Secret Radical by Helena Kelly, which I didn't buddy read with Marissa from Blatantly Bookish. She read it several months before me and we talked about it a lot while she was reading it, and then I read it and we talked about it a lot again. And so I feel like I've had like almost 2 reading experiences. Like I feel like I've got Marissa's reading experience of that book as well as my own, and like pushed them together to give me like a double reading experience, if that makes sense. So I feel like there's a lot of times like that with buddy reads or with just like general discussions with other booktubers who've read the same books, and that kind of really like enriches my reading in a lot of ways, I think, and it's something I really love about Booktube. Question 10. What influence do you hope your own channel will have on the Booktube community and or aspiring booktubers? So this is quite a hard one to answer, I suppose. Over the last like year, I have watched a couple of people's Booktube newbie tags of people whose channels I really love, who mentioned enjoying my videos in their Booktube newbie tag, and that made me like really happy. Like I cannot explain how happy that made me. And I think a lot of it, like, there are actually quite a lot of us who talk about classics on Booktube, but I think because it's not the most like visible genre discussed, I think it helps to have more of us, and I hope like starting Booktuber and doing Jane Austen July and that kind of stuff, I think will help people know that there are people who read and really enjoy classics on Booktube, which means other people who watch Booktube and like classics can feel like they might be able to start a channel too, or like they might want to watch more Booktube. You know, obviously I don't exclusively talk about classics, I don't exclusively read classics. I would say classics make up maybe about half of my reading, maybe just under, depending on the month or the year. But I love classics a lot, and they're something I talk about a lot on this channel, especially about 19th century literature, and I hope that that will have and has had an influence on the Booktube community in terms of making more people talk about those kind of books and making people know who don't make Booktube videos that this is a platform where we also talk about classics as well as YA and literary fiction, which I think are the 2 genres which were most represented on Booktube when I started, but actually now I see a much wider range of genres talked about and discussed, which I really love, and it's something that makes me happy. And it's nice to see more people talking about classics on Booktube as well. Obviously, like, it's not like I'm responsible for that, but it's nice to feel that I am a part of that at least. And I hope things like Booktuber and Jane Austen July and doing read-alongs of Victorian literature and things like that, like I hope that will have encouraged more people to read classics on Booktube and more people who read classics to be on Booktube and talk about classics on Booktube. So I hope for that. That's something I would like my channel to have influenced, I suppose. But there we go. Finally, I need to tag some people. I tend to be quite bad at tagging people. So firstly, I will tag all the booktubers who I have mentioned in this video. And then I'm also going to tag Tilly Shelf, who's a fairly new booktuber who I'm really loving. I'm also going to tag Ollie Bliss, I'm going to tag Sean the Bookmaniac, and I'm going to tag Andrea from Infinite Text, and I'm going to tag Carolyn from Carolyn's Reading Rambles. That is all I think I want to say today. Thank you very much for watching. Please let me know down in the comments how being on Booktube or how watching Booktube has affected your reading, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.